today's session, I want to give you just a brief outline. We're going to be touching three main buckets. So we're going to be talking about toxic workplace experiences and even just talking about some of the signals to be aware of to realize that you're not okay, but also that you're getting to this point of like actual like mental and emotional harm. We're going to be talking and unpacking a little bit about the barriers towards healing. And then we're going to discuss some practical steps towards healing, as well as teasing out a little bit the difference between coping and healing, because I think a lot of times people view that as synonymous, but they're very different. Um, the other thing I want to do is if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A section. We're going to leave the last 15 minutes for a live Q&A and try and work through as many of those questions as possible. Feel free to share stories, insights in the chat. If something that we say resonates, feel free to +1 it in the chat. If you see someone else in the chat that says something that resonates, +1 that. We can have a little bit more engaging experience that way. And I'll start by, I guess, introducing myself, then Alison will, and then we'll dive into it. So I'm Vivian Castillo. I'm the founder of Humanity Centered. We are a professional growth group that is committed to helping folks do the personal work required to do their best professional work. My background originally is in counseling and human services, and I made a career switch into UX and big tech, 6-ish, 7-ish years ago now. Time means nothing. But I left corporate America about 4 months ago to fully dedicate time and energy, not only into Humanity Center, but into my own healing and well-being. And I'll pass it off to Alison.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Vivian. Hi, I'm Alison Taylor. I'm the founder and first employee at my business design and strategy studio called Augur, because it's where I work. It is not my identity. Right? And I have a background in art and design, and for a really long time, I worked in hospitality design, construction as a project manager. And I made my switch into tech and tech adjacent life about 3 years ago or so. And it's been really exciting to see the changes, to live 1,000 different lives. And much like Vivian said, time means nothing. So yeah, I have a wealth of experience all over in a whole bunch of different industries and places. And now I'm here to work with startups, creative freelancers, and other entrepreneurs on creating sustainable, equitable businesses from the start, helping them design inclusive products and services. And how do we create better experiences for all and make everything better? So people first. Hey, Kev.
I love it. I'm here for it. So I want to dive into some of our experiences within toxic workplaces. I also just want to acknowledge that we'll probably be diving into some like heavy stories and heavy experiences. So in the midst of that, take care of yourself. If you feel like it's overwhelming, if you're sensing your body feeling anxious, like do yourself a favor and step away and take a breath. But specifically, I want us to focus on the start of our workplace experience and experiences when it comes to toxicity, to when we realized we needed help and that we weren't okay. And with that, I think it's also important to acknowledge that Alison and I are coming from two very different experiences, not only within our corporate experience, but in also our own healing journeys. And we'll also probably have different points of view on things as well in this conversation. And that's okay. I'm 4 months into my healing journey, and Alison is about 4 years. And actually 4 years since you found yourself in the hospital due to burnout and a toxic, abusive workplace situation. So maybe just to give context to our audience, can you maybe share with us your story, specifically from the point that you entered that toxic work experience to when you realized that you needed help and that you weren't okay?
Yeah. So I used to work for, you can go to my LinkedIn, you can find this out. I used to work for Wyndham Vacation Ownership, and I oversaw resort renovation and design for the western half of the United States. So any properties that touched, west of the Mississippi, I owned that entire region solely by myself, which should start off this story in a lot of great ways. So I worked for Wyndham as a third party rep, doing on-site project management work for them, overseeing their stuff. And really, I was riding the ship when it was ready to capsize, and that was pretty much all the time. And so they spent a lot of time headhunting me to bring me into the organization rather than having me as a third party. And I should have known, right? Like, if you're always cleaning up messes for people, going in-house is probably going to be messier and it's probably going to be worse. So I went in. 10 days later, my favorite friend who was there unceremoniously fired. Like, this is a company that I realized known for sacrificial lambs. So I'd be overseeing these resort renovations at any given time. You don't want to oversee more than 5. And these are multi-million dollars, renovations. We're talking several hundred rooms, interior, exterior, all kinds of stuff, lots of moving pieces, lots of large teams. And then as the project manager, I owned everything. And it was my belief that as a PM, my job is to help everybody do their job better and be more efficient and effective, come in on time, under budget, and on schedule, right? So my colleague gets fired. I take on all of his workload and all of my workload. It's going well for a while. And then I started in July. It wasn't until about January when I found out that I was going to be getting a new manager. And this manager has, notorious for being insensitive, for not wanting to work, for misogyny, for racism, for bigotry, for all of the things, right? All of the yucky things. And I was constantly asking him for help. I was like, hey, I'm overloaded with projects. I've got 7 active renovations right now with another 9 that are getting ready to start within 6 weeks' time. And I was constantly, dealing with corruption in that job. I don't know how many people know this or if it's very common, but in construction, there's a lot of kickbacks. There's a lot of handholding. There's a lot of, if you choose my firm, your kitchen will be renovated at cost. So I was dealing with a lot of those really unfortunate inner workings. And as a, early 30s, I didn't know how to spot corruption when it was going on around me. I knew enough to understand that the financials didn't make any sense. And I'd be up spending hours, working 12 to 15-hour days on all of these projects, trying to make sense of these budgets that were coming in that didn't make sense, that didn't align with the scope of the project. And, it was really unfortunate. So I get this new manager, doesn't want to work, doesn't want to help, and really did everything in his power to get me out of there. So he had me talk about, gaslighting, talk about abuse. There were times where I would have colleagues say to me, Allison, I can't believe that you are taking this abuse on these meetings and on these calls. And I can't believe that people are speaking to you like this. And you're just taking it in stride and pushing these projects forward and doing the best by our clients and our guests and our business partners and doing the best by everybody, but I wasn't doing the best by myself because I was sacrificing my health, my happiness, my wellness for a job that was thankless, for a manager who didn't appreciate me and eventually, had a very active hand in me winding up in the hospital.
Yeah. I guess, can you maybe like unpack a little bit the moments that led up to you realizing that you needed to be in the hospital? Like, how did...
It wasn't that I realized that I needed to be. Okay. So I woke up and I couldn't function. That's how I wound up going to the hospital. My body was shutting down on me. So I had lost about 40 pounds in 6 months. My hair was falling out. I stopped eating. I wasn't doing laundry. I wasn't going to the gym. I was spending my time having panic attacks. I was spending my time working, and like I said, 12 to 15-hour days on all of these projects, trying to keep everything moving forward. So I was on the West Coast, everybody was on the East Coast. And the first things to go are like the ancillary stuff, right? Like, okay, well, I'm not going to the gym nearly as much anymore. All right, but I'm still eating. I'm still, on a conference call, making lunch, doing this. But then all of a sudden it's like, well, I'm not going to the gym, but my clothes are getting too big. And my clothes are getting too big. And my clothes are getting too big. And I'm not eating and I'm not sleeping. And I'm waking up at 3 a.m. because I'm having panic attacks and wake myself out of a dead sleep because I need to go and fix some of these things because I just got too tired in the morning or at the end of the night. So go work from 3 to 5 a.m. so that people on the East Coast could get it. Take a power nap, get up, shower, be at work by 8:30 on my computer, having a full day, work till 7, 8, take a quick break, come back in, 11, 12, do some work, try to sleep, wake up in a panic, do more work, ask for help, never get it. Rinse and repeat. So I was in Missouri and those were those 7 projects that were going on. And so I'm bouncing back and forth between Arkansas and Missouri to go see these different sites. And stuff wasn't going down. This manager came to the site and visited. And the one thing I really remember was I was driving back with a colleague, and he said to me, Alison, I want every single directive that you have ever given this client, and I want it by midnight. It's like 5 o'clock. Every single piece of correspondence he wanted me to package, put together, and send to him after working hours, mind you. After my day is done. Oops. He wanted me to do that. And I'm like, well, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I'm driving and like, you haven't believed me up to this point. Why is putting any of this stuff together going to make you believe me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think too, kind of like what you're getting at is like, you're talking about all these signs, these symptoms. And I think many of us are taught, oh, that's just a part of working.
Right.
That's just a part of the job. Like, I know for me, I won't fully get into my story. I mean, if you want to read it, you can reread this LinkedIn post. But, for me, I realized, so I actually took about 2.5 months of leave towards the end of 2020. I think this is also a common experience for a lot of minorities in tech, but there's a job that you were hired for. And then there's the other job that you're kind of slated with like DEI, like, making inclusive workplace environments and all those things. And so I was doing my 9-to-5 job, but also I was doing a lot of free emotional labor, a lot of free internal work. I had connections within the DEI community before I came into Salesforce. And I found myself working a lot within like the folks within the Office of Equality. I have a little bit of a weird story in that I was at Salesforce for 2 years, but in my first year had already built relationships with executives, C-level executives, was on a texting and FaceTiming basis with some of these leaders, was being invited to do trainings and workshops at leadership offsites and helping to, shape internal policy, all that in addition to the job I was hired for. And towards the end of 2020, I found that I was losing myself. I wasn't sleeping as much. I think I was running on about like 4 hours of sleep. I was like feeling anxious often. And I probably have a reputation of being more outspoken, more unfiltered, but there's still a lot of anxiety and fear that's attached to that. I just choose to operate in the midst of it. I found myself not enjoying my relationships as much. I found myself just withdrawing from a lot of things that used to give me energy. And for me, one of the most egregious things an entity or a person can do is to break your spirit. And I felt like I was getting to this place of, if I don't stop and like pull back, I'm legitimately afraid that I won't be able to work again. Like I won't have the energy to like work. And so I ended up taking 2.5 months of medical leave. We should have another webinar another time about like how to actually take leave, get short-term disability. Because a lot of these companies will like talk about PTO, but they don't want you to know that you get paid short-term disability for mental health issues. But more on that another day. But I took 2.5 months of leave. And that first week of leave, I literally had an anxiety attack because I realized I wasn't working. What the fuck? Like, I was like, my body was so used to like being on, my mind, my spirit was so used to being on. I had an anxiety attack that first week. And, you know, I would say probably like one of the greatest things that I got from that time of leave was clarity. Clarity about what I'm passionate about, clarity around who I am outside of what I can produce. Because I think a lot of times these systems will try and get you to conflate your identity with how they see your identity and your worth. You know, I was also working through, it wasn't just like microaggressions. It wasn't just, you know, racism that I was experiencing. It was a culture of gaslighting. And I don't use gaslighting lightly. Like, gaslighting is a common abuse tactic within domestic violence relationships. You know, gaslighting is the thing that makes you question your reality. So I think a lot of marginalized folks know on this call, it's when you see your company getting that best place for diversity award, and you know about the turnover, you know about the stories that are really going on. It's so dangerous. And I think particularly in my situation, the gaslighting was often coupled with performative allyship. So I think a lot of times we're sometimes we're in these cultures that, especially as of last summer, you know, have been raving about how they're allies. More on that another day. But what happens is they teach that as long as you think you're a good person, as long as you think you're nice enough, then you're an ally. Don't worry about having to do any of the work. As long as you think you're a good person, you're an ally. So then when said ally is confronted with their microaggression, something sexist or racist or ableist or homophobic that they said ally says, no, not me. I'm an ally. I'm a good person. Are you sure it's not you? Are you sure you're not overreacting? Are you sure you're not just playing the race card? And when you're in a culture, when you're on a team that does that often, that is a form of abuse. So I took 2.5 months of leave, and you know, one of the greatest things that I got was, again, like clarity. And I was at a point where I was debating. I was like, man, I don't know if I can do this corporate thing anymore. And actually, I don't think I've told a lot of people this story. It was a week before I was supposed to go back to Salesforce, and I was watching the movie Judas and the Black Messiah, which is a movie about Fred Hampton leading the Black Panthers in Chicago. So there's this scene, I'll wrap this up. There's this scene in the beginning where Fred Hampton is at this rally, and they're super excited that they're naming this community college after Malcolm X. And Fred Hampton gets up afterwards and he's like, yeah, that's cool. That's cool. You think that's going to make you free? And I just had this moment where I was like, oh, I'm not free. We're going to give you Juneteenth and Martin Luther King Jr. Day off. You think that's going to make you free? We're going to give you this little mentorship program. You think that's going to make you free? We're going to give you a few thousand more dollars on your paycheck. You think that's going to make you free? And I just realized I wasn't free. And so that's what led me to step away and to leave and to focus on what does that journey look like to heal from toxic workplace experiences.
That's fantastic. I love that you listened, right? You listened to your body, because I didn't. I ignored every single solitary warning sign and symptom, because more money, more problems, all the things that are tied to our employment. And mind you, I was their sweet, shining little star. I was the one who had perfect, beautiful, exalted employment reviews. I was the one who was made an example to for the entire department to say, Alison did this, you know, we had a breach of contract, and the way that Alison administered this contract and this breach and asked for all these things, this is the example that we want to see in this department. Right?
Yeah. And I think what that also gets at is like, it gets at this idea of like institutional betrayal. If you haven't heard this term, please do yourself a favor and Google it and like read more about the studies on it. But the term institutional betrayal refers to wrongdoings perpetuated by an institution, a company, on individuals who are dependent on that institution. And this also includes failure to prevent or respond supportively to wrongdoings by individuals within that institution. So like harassment, microaggressions, retaliations, and again, things that have happened within the context of that institution. And what's interesting to know about institutional betrayal is that it's connected to research around trauma. So like what we're hearing and what we're talking about is it's not just toxic, like I had a bad day workplace experiences. This is trauma.
Yes. Yes. Full-blown trauma, the kind that still, like, like we said, I'm 4 years in and I'm still finding hidden remnants of that
Yes.
trauma in my soul and in my psyche that I still have to overcome. It is
Yes.
insidious. It gets pushed down and into every crevice and facet of who you are.
Yes. Yes. And the thing about trauma too, this is me leaning a little bit on my like therapist days right now, so bear with me. The thing about trauma is that if you don't deal with it, your body will store it. That's why, Allison's talking about like her body started to shut down. That's how anxiety attacks start to play out. But the other thing about trauma is that our minds and our bodies will often suppress symptoms and even memories until it feels like we're safe enough to process it. So like for me, my first 30 days out of corporate, I was on a high. I was like free at last. I made it. But around day 30 is when the trauma and the grief and the memories and the anger started to surface. Things that I didn't even like realize I had buried and forgotten about. Like, oh yeah, that did happen. That person did say that thing. That person did do that thing. And what I appreciate is like your honesty around like healing. Like trauma lingers.
Yeah.
And there isn't like, if you're coming to this webinar hoping to like get the silver bullet to like feel no pain, like that's just not how like trauma and healing work. Yeah.
And I hearing you talk about your first 30 days out. So y'all, I took a year off from working. My memories truly of the burnout and of the healing and of the trauma and everything, that actually came after I stopped working. Because like you said, my body then had the opportunity and I was down bad, people, down bad. I actually wound up eventually going to intensive outpatient therapy because this then became a workers' compensation issue. I was hurt at work. I was injured at work. I didn't do this to myself, although I had to recognize my complacency and being complicit in the role and how I got there. I had to own that this was not just a one-way thing that was happening to me. I was not simply targeted. I stayed there. I didn't look for another job. I kept going and I kept fighting, and I thought that I was going to be able to work my way out and through it. That wasn't the case. So I had to take a year off. I went to the equivalent of 5 years, of therapy in 5 months. I went 3 days a week, 4 hours a day for 5 months to group therapy to figure out and unpack everything that got me up to that point. And I mean, this was like 32 years of being a human. Everything that I had learned, all of my conditioning, everything that got me to that point that said, well, Allison, if you just work a little harder, it'll be fine. Like you'll work your way through it. You'll work your way out of it. You can't outwork or outrun trauma. It will always win.
Yes.
It will always win. And mine was so bad that yes, I got to the point not where I had to be fully, hospitalized in a mental health facility, but that's the next step.
Yes. No, I appreciate you sharing that of like, yeah, you can't outrun it. You can't outwork it. You can't out hustle it. Like it is something that you have to sit with and you have to deal with it. And you know, I think about like, gosh, there's so much I want to say in this moment, but like, you know, and again, like I took like 2.5 months off. Then you know, that first month, the trauma started to surface. But, you know, for me, I remember after 1 month of being at Salesforce and just kind of reading the writings on the wall, also just my training in gaslighting and therapy, I was like, I need a therapist. So I started seeing a therapist after 1 month of being at Salesforce. And just in general, like I already had a ritual in the beginning of every year. I would always commit like a month and a half to therapy. I viewed it like a physical, but for my spirit, and my soul. And so, because I have blind spots, but I started going to therapy, and I continued in therapy the whole time I was at Salesforce. So for me, I also had the benefit of a therapist who was like, hey, like, I'm noticing your identity is really wrapped up in what, you know, these companies, what these managers are saying, because I definitely operate out of the belief that unconsciously and consciously, a lot of these corporations will exploit your trauma. You have struggle with feeling validated and valued, they'll exploit that. You have trouble of being able to advocate for yourself and identify what boundaries you need to put in place, they'll exploit that. And so I had a therapist during my entire time at Salesforce. She's great. Like if I could tip a therapist, I would. And again, I think that played a huge part in I think the start of my trauma healing journey. And I'm still healing. Like I wish I could have like a testimony where no, it's all good, but it's a continual healing journey. So I want to switch a little bit into understanding kind of like the barriers towards healing. So when we're operating out of a place of survival instead of flourishing, when we're operating out of a place of fear instead of freedom, it can be incredibly tough to clearly see the barriers in the way of our healing. So I would love to hear, like, Alison, like, knowing what you know now, what were some of the barriers that made it tough for you to move forward and see and understand your true worth and value?
Oh, hubris, man. Whoa. Like me, I was the biggest barrier to my own healing. I'm gonna be 100% honest with it. That's when I was talking about all that stuff that I had to unlearn. I thought that, okay, so I didn't want to go to a dual diagnosis program because I was like, well, I don't have a substance abuse issue. I have, you know, depression, anxiety, all this stuff going on from my workplace. And so I was going back and forth with the insurance company, seeing this huge list of places that I could maybe go to or call. And I'm in the throes of trauma and I am actively in crisis. And it was me who thought, because of my upbringing, because of my background, well, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be seen in this place. Like the vanity that I had, right? To thinking, well, I'm too good for getting help here. Like, you need help. You need help. Take whatever help you can get. And actually, that's what happened. I was at a point where I had to make the choice to save my own life. That's what it was coming down to.
Yeah.
I had to save my own life. And so I just picked a place, went through it, and it was everything that I needed.
Yeah.
Shout outs to Jan. Jan's a real one.
I love it.
But I'm just saying, I was my biggest barrier. Whatever mental blocks I had to undo. I had to unlearn. I had to get over. Because there are resources everywhere.
Yeah.
I can't put it on anybody else. I can only own it for me. So for me, I was my biggest block.
Yeah. And I think too, like when we talk about healing, even when we talk about like navigating the workplace, we tend to frame it from an individualistic solo journey, but really it should be a shared one. It should be one where you are able to either share with a therapist, you're able to even, I know that there are people on this call where you haven't even articulated to close friends and families like how bad your situation is because you're either one, embarrassed, or two, you're shaming your way into gratitude. I see this often. People will be like, well, I have a job, I'm paying, and there are people who have it so much worse, so
Right.
it's not as bad. But you know, I think about how Brene Brown has this quote where she talks about how shame only needs three things to grow and fester, which is secrecy, silence, and judgment. And so many of us, I know I did at a certain point, was just suffering in silence, or I was just
Yeah.
diminishing it. Like it's not that bad.
Right. Right. It's not that bad. I've had worse. Oh, I can make it. Oh, there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
But is there?
Yeah. And I think like I think within this conversation of like understanding the barriers towards healing is understanding the difference between coping and healing. So last week we did a webinar with Jarrell Carabello, a licensed therapist. They're also working with me we're teaching, Humanity Center is offering this new offering called Healing Conversations, where we get into deeper, we dive in deeper into topics like this and help people operate out of a place of freedom instead of fear. So Jarrell on this call last week, someone was asking a question around when does the pain stop? Like when am I able to just like put it behind me and like get my life back? And he shared how like he's like we need to differentiate, we need to talk about the difference between coping and healing. He's like you can't heal in a toxic environment. That's counterintuitive to healing. And what most people misunderstand about healing is that healing doesn't mean that the pain goes away, because
Right.
there will always be pain. Like there's actually a place that I work that's not even on my LinkedIn because it was so traumatic. Like attorneys had to be involved. Like my attorney was even like, wow, it's almost like they want you dead. Like it was bad. And you know, there's still pain that lingers from that, but it's about learning how to shrink the pain so that it's tolerable, so that it doesn't disrupt things, so that it doesn't get in the way of your ability to flourish, to dream, to pursue new opportunities, or to see and understand your true value and self-worth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, wow. You got me thinking about this even more deeply. I'm like, what did I do to cope when I was there? And then what did I do? Because you can have a little bit of both, right? You can have
Yeah.
things that you do to cope that actually are part of your healing journey. So for me, getting deeper into my spirituality and wellness and physical fitness and health as a outlet for stress, as an outlet for anxiety, as a outlet for, for anything, for all of these emotions that I wasn't seeing or wasn't feeling or wasn't allowing to come to the surface. So um, that was something that I did to both cope and is an avid part of my healing practice now. It's part of my spiritual wellness, mental health journey and practice that I have. But for me at that time, right, coping was like, okay, I'm going to do this even better. I'm going to format this spreadsheet better. I'm going to send these emails better. I'm going to continue to CYA. I'm going to document. I'm going to say I'm only going to spend this much time, right? Like I'm trying to put in these really loose borders and boundaries, but I wasn't abiding by any of them. But there would just be a few
Yeah.
things where, to cope, I would then go out with my friends. I would
Mm.
go out and go out hard, right?
Mm.
Parting my face off. Sometimes that was the answer. Sometimes it was blowing off steam that way, right? Like I wouldn't necessarily say, actually no, everybody's coping mechanisms and methods are different. The hope is that you have some of the healthiest ones possible that you can find and you let them evolve and you let them grow. Would I tell anybody to not go and like party? Listen, if you're a club kid like I was, I worked in music. I love music. I like make house songs. I grew up on house. To me, dancing is a form, and going to clubs and going to shows is a form of creative expression for me. So while that might not behoove everybody, you know, that was a way that I found that I could cope. And my job before that, when I was working for them on site, like I would go and dance every Wednesday at this place when I lived in Denver called Club Vinyl. And I was so stressed out as a traveling consultant that like on Wednesdays I would dance. That was part of how I coped. I wasn't dancing because it's something that I love to do. And like I had a full blown dance party before coming on to shake out some nerves because it just helps me feel free. But you know, it wasn't doing that for fun. It was doing that because I needed to, because I didn't have any other I didn't have any other outlet versus like, this is my enjoyment. This is my creative expression.
Yeah.
That was how I chose to cope.
Yeah. And I appreciate your nod to like, under the umbrella of coping, there's healthy and unhealthy ways to cope. For me, when I'm thinking about coping, I'm thinking about things that have two aspects to them. One, give me a sense of control, and two, that are good for me. And I need both of those together, because there's a lot of unhealthy coping mechanisms I know I engage with that of course give me, you know, a sense of control, but were not good for me.
Right.
And so like, I don't know, like I think about ways that I coped while in the midst. I think I ran through my whole spreadsheet of unhealthy coping mechanisms. Things to numb. We all have our vices.
Yeah.
Things to numb, things to distract, things to even like if it's painful, at least it's taking your mind off of the pain of your current situation. But I think about healthy ways that I coped as well. And one of the ways that I coped was, and I know this isn't the case for everyone, but I'm so incredibly grateful that all my friends do not work in tech or UX. Like, thank you, God. Like, just to like, I would, you know, there would be days where I'm literally it'd be like 3:30 and I'm like, you know what, I'm going to go play with my baby nephew. And I would just close my laptop, cancel all my meetings. Not saying I would always recommend this, but sometimes I would lie and be like, yeah, I don't feel good, which actually was kind of true. And then cancel my meetings and then go off and play with my nephew. I would, you know, go on bike rides. Like I live in Chicago, so I love making dope playlists and then riding my bike along the river and the lakeside. I also, part of coping too was I started to build humanity centered. You know, I had a friend who I had a day where I was kind of venting about how I was just so tired of having to fight and make a case for people at my work to care about people. She was like, well, instead of like hoping that Salesforce will validate your ideas and your dreams, why don't you just go do it outside of it? So sometimes like those hobbies, those passion projects are healthy ways of coping. When I think about healing, and again, like I'm still in this process of healing, I kind of view it into, I cut it into two buckets. And I talked about this on the moral injury webinar, so I'm going to talk about it again. And a shout out to Robin Counts for helping me to think about this framing. But I have learned to make a commitment to I work, like individual work, and then we work, like communal work. This probably comes from also my understanding of ACT, which is called acceptance and commitment therapy. And ACT is a psychological intervention that uses acceptance and mindfulness strategies and commitment and behavior change strategies. So ACT encourages people to embrace their thoughts and feelings rather than fighting or feeling guilty for them. And so if we're starting here, it's important to know and understand that action needs to be built into your recovery and healing plan. So when I think about I work, I think about three things. Getting really clear on who you are outside of what you can produce. That is something that it looks different, 2 months ago than it does today. But the more you're able to divorce and separate the ways that our companies, our workplaces tell you that you're valuable, tell you that you are worthy, and you're able to actually get clear on what actually makes you worthy and valuable a part of it, the more space then you have to heal. We talked about this earlier. I had to do some personal work and think about what are the ways that my workplace situation, my toxic, managers, whatever it may be, what are some of the ways that they are exploiting my insecurities or exploiting my childhood or adulthood trauma? Like, what is it that is triggering me when they say and do these things? And where does that really come from? Which is also why I really encourage people, if you can afford it, to go to therapy, because therapy will help you unpack and get clear on your triggers. Therapy will help you give you the tools and the resources that you need to combat shame-based messages that cause that internalization, that festering, that silence, that secrecy, that inner judgment. And so I did a lot of really good work with my therapist. I also have a Black woman therapist who specializes in trauma, because I didn't have time to on-ramp a white woman with my experience of being a Black woman in corporate. But also because I'm a trained therapist, I needed a therapist who counseled other therapists. Because I told her, I was like, your bullshit radar needs to be on a whole nother level with me, because I know how to give the illusion of depth. And then the last thing I'll say, and then we'll jump into live Q&A, because we have some really great questions, is what I call we work or community work. So like, you can't heal outside of community. I'm just going to say that. Like, if you think you could do this on your own, to what Alison was saying, pride.
Yeah.
And don't let pride get in the way of your healing and those blessings. Okay. And so I think a lot of folks, and especially since I've left corporate and I've released that public letter, my inboxes these days are full of people's trauma. Like, there's unsolicited trauma stories, which is like a whole nother thing with boundaries, but more on that on another day. But a lot of folks I talk to that are they're suffering in silence because they believe that healing is a solo journey, when in reality it should be a shared one. So being able to find community, being able to find your people who get it, who help you feel seen and understood, and don't gaslight your pain, don't shame you into gratitude. Is everything.
Absolutely. Right. And like, here's the other thing, that community, as you continue to grow and evolve and heal, that community that you have around you is going to grow and evolve as well. So understand that, like, the people I was thick as thieves with in IOP, people will be like, oh, do you talk to them? No, not at all. I don't, because actually those friendships, trauma bonds. I'm not about that, right? Like, I am not about trauma bonds.
Oh my gosh.
We have our time, we have our experience, we are here. I wish them all very, very, very well. I hope they are all doing beautifully in their recovery journey. But I don't want to maintain those friendships because I don't want to go back and constantly have to be reliving that trauma, those shared traumas that we heard and related to, and all of these things. And so, like, there's seasons. People have seasons in your life. And I think, like, let's normalize seasonality. Let's normalize growth. Let's normalize that not everyone is meant to enter your life for long periods of time, but you might meet somebody. You might come to this workshop today, right? And this might change your life. This 60 minutes that we spend together might change your life. We might become now in community on Twitter, social media, or in real life, but you may never ever see me again also, right? Like, but I hope that this moment of impact, that you realize that we are in community together, and I'm here and I'm rooting for you for wherever your journey takes you.
Plus a million. And also too, the more you heal, the less compatible some people will be to your healed self.
Yup.
And that is such a gift. Like, when you're able to quickly recognize, like, yo, I'm healthier, I'm in a more healed place, like, we are no longer compatible.
Yeah.
Like,
truly.
Yes. Okay. So many questions. I was trying to weave some of them into our talk. I'll kick this one to you first, Allison, and then I'll give it my best shot. But how do you get past the rage? How do you get past the anger towards abusive and toxic managers?
Burn it to the ground. I'm not done. I keep that rage in a perfume bottle. I spray it on when I want to. Like, listen. Bottle that rage and I sell it at a high count per ounce, right?
Oh
like,
God.
Truly. It's not that I got past it. I just repurposed that rage. But it goes back a little bit to what Vivian was saying in terms of like coping and healing. I started learning. I threw myself into social enterprise and social impact learning, and I was in the throes of all of it. And when you start doing social impact work or social enterprise work, and you're thinking about how do we work with the poorest of the poor, how am I doing systems design? And like, I was spending my spare time thinking about how do we improve the asylum system for people who are doing land border crossings from, I think, Honduras, Mexico, Guatemala, and somewhere else. Like, that's what I spend my free time doing. So I let that rage that I have, I let that be fuel for educating myself. I let that be fuel for where I'm going to go. And then, sometimes I just bring it out and I call people out on social media. The way that I think about rage is it's fuel if you let it be. How are you going to use that? How are you going to repurpose this energy? It's all energy. So take it, channel it, and then what else can you use it for?
I mean, I feel that to a certain extent. I feel like I repurpose rage, although I probably lean a little bit more towards and believe me, there are triggers, right? Where I'm reminded of my, white manager, white passing woman manager, whatever it is. And I definitely have those internal moments of being like, what the fuck? Like, that person really messed up a significant chunk of my life. I've learned to repurpose that rage as a sign that I made the right choice to choose me. And there were times too with some of those toxic managers where in the moment, and again, I'm okay being confrontational. I'm okay. I think I am pretty good at articulating my thoughts in the moment. Part of that is because I was half Korean mom and I didn't get beatings as a kid. I had to do book reports and papers. So I think that also played a part into why I'm really quick with my words. And so I did have those moments too, where I confronted my managers on the spot. But I look back at those moments, especially when I'm triggered now, and I'm like, I'm so grateful I'm not in that. I'm so grateful I decided to remove myself from that. And for those of you on this call, Alison and I decided that, our part of our healing was to leave corporate America and do our own thing. But for you, healing could also look like switching teams, switching to companies where you can be on a better team. I don't want to push this idea that the only way to heal is to leave corporate and run your own business and do your own thing.
Right.
Yeah.
That's not it at all. Listen, y'all, this little place, this little glitch right there, that company, I think saved my life. I went to go work at Twitch after I took that year off. I did not care about gaming. I like it. I'm a casual gamer, whatever. It does not move my world. But the people that I worked with were so kind. It was an environment where I got to champion community. I went and I took a role that was so I could do my job with my eyes closed. It did not require that much out of me, but what it did was allow me to fill my cup. What it did was reminded me of the value and the worth that I knew was there, that was inherent, but it was being recognized. Going from a place where you're on a team where your colleagues recognize how poor you're being treated but aren't doing anything, to being on a team where you are being recognized, where you are being told that you are an asset, where you are doing really amazing work, and like it is, people are giving you more responsibility and they are exalting you, and they're putting your name into these spaces, and they're giving you this responsibility because they know you can handle it, and they're really thankful. Like that was everything that I needed.
Mm,
Looking at the end of, now gaming has a lot of problems, Amazon has a lot of issues as a company as a whole. And so that was my last foray into leaving, but it was a nice goodbye. It was a
yeah.
beautiful, beautiful goodbye to corporate life, corporate experience, and all of that. So you're right, right? It doesn't mean that you have to leave corporate America. I still come in and work with startups and like, all of my people, but I still, have corporate clients. I'm not mad at working with a Fortune 50 client to help them make places and business ecosystems and workspaces better for their employees. Like that's all I care about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you can do either or. I just simply do not want to work for other people like that.
Mm-hmm.
I do
Let's,
not want others to have my value and my worth and put a price on it that is inequitable to me.
hmm.
You know?
Yeah. Let's jump into this next question. And we might hang out for, do you have a hard stop, Allison?
Let me ask my boss. Do you have a heart? Oh, let's go.
so
Let's go.
so we might hang out for a few minutes after the top of the hour to get through a couple more questions, but let's start off with this one. Any advice for job seekers not carrying the assumption with them that a future employer or manager won't be as abusive as the last? um, so I'll read that again. Any advice for job seekers not carrying assumptions with them that a future employer or manager won't be as abusive as the last?
Any advice? Well, I think at the end of the day, when I think about relationships, like we can't take that relationship that we have with one person and put it onto other people. And then what are we bringing with us? And I think you're already cognizant of some of that fear um, that lives inside you as you're doing this job seeking. So, how do you, I guess the better question is, how do you alleviate that fear? How do you ask the questions that only you can ask to get those answers that will help you feel better about that experience?
Mm,
So, is this, I'm a person who I guess I have a more internal locus of control. I am internal in terms of how I get my decisions. I don't do a lot of necessarily a lot of external research to help me make my decisions. But if you need to get those questions answered to alleviate that fear, how are you going to do that? Because the next manager you might have, right? Like I was scared that the next manager I could have had would be horrible after Wyndham going to Twitch, but then my next manager at Twitch is like, shout outs to Marcy Hughes. Like, wonderful, amazing, kind human being who like remembers my birthday, and I haven't worked there for like 2.5 years, you know? Um, so
yeah.
your trauma is gonna come with you, but you don't have to bring your baggage with you. That
Hmm.
is not a requirement. It's not a requirement, but to understand the next situations that you're going to go into, what do you want to know about this workplace? How are you going to ask how they treat people? Are you talking to anybody who has worked there before or has left there on both good and bad terms? Are you looking at the company as a whole? Are you interested on like your team? Because right, like I had a great team, not necessarily like the most ideal company. Um,
Yeah.
until it fell apart, right? So
Yeah.
it's a tough question. I don't have like a great answer for it. I'm sorry, but my biggest thing is how can you find that alleviation for yourself?
Yeah. I think to your point, it's more of an art than a science.
Mhm.
The two things that kind of come up for me with to that question is um, get really clear on your boundaries.
Yeah.
Like I think our boundaries communicate how we allow people to treat us.
Yes.
And so getting really clear on boundaries, I'll drop this book in the chat. This book has been really helpful for me when it comes to getting really clear on what the boundaries are and how to implement them both personally and professionally. So boundaries, I think, is really important. I think also too, getting really clear on your triggers and like your self-talk game. Because there are going to be moments, even if your new manager is healthy, it's kind of like, I saw this a lot when I was a therapist. Also, if you have to roll off the top of the hour, we will send the recording. Feel free to dip. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
But I just, it's kind of like what I see when people are in like abusive relationships and then they leave their partner and they end up with like someone else. There's always going to be like those triggers. There's going to be like issues of trust. And trust and vulnerability go hand in hand. You can't extend trust without being vulnerable. You can't be vulnerable with someone without trust. And being really clear on like what those triggers are. And if you feel comfortable, like having conversations and expectation setting with your manager from the jump of what you need in order to be successful. So there's a book that I would always encourage folks to read. It's called It's Okay to Manage Your Boss. It's a really great book on managing up, which, side note, if you are in a company or a culture where managing up is the norm, like that's just like not healthy and like leave. But this book is really great at giving practical ways to communicate what you need, what you want in order to be successful, both from the professional and the personal stance. And so I think that's also like a really important conversation to have from the jump. You don't have to get into the nitty gritty about your last toxic workplace experience and why you now need like more like validation or affirmation that you're on the right track. But you could frame it as, hey, in order for me to do well and to thrive in this role, I need cues and signals from you that I'm on track. So, if I, whether that is like an email, like you being intentional, I'm a words of affirmation person, like that helps me to know that I'm doing this well, or where I need to change and adjust. So you can frame it in that way as well. So yeah. And then we'll do one more question just because I want to be aware of people's time, for people who are choosing to linger instead of go to your next meeting.
Because I could be at this all day.
Yeah.
All day.
Let's see. I guess the last question I will share is around man, there's so many good ones. We'll do this one. Can you speak more on trauma bonding amongst peers and how to identify that versus communal healing?
Ooh, do you want to take? Okay, I'm like,
yeah,
do you want to take this one?
Yeah. I'll take a first swing at this. So the question is, may you speak more on trauma bonding amongst peers and how to identify that versus community healing? So when I left Salesforce, I definitely have like a small group of lifetime friends. And this is how I knew that we would last after I left. Because while we worked together at Salesforce, we didn't just talk about the trauma. We didn't talk about that one manager. We didn't talk about like the gaslighting, like all the things. Like we talked about, like we actually had a friendship. We talked about other things outside of work. We talked about passions. We talked about what I did over the weekend, and it was genuine and authentic. And we could hang out without talking about work ever. Now, I did have a whole bucket of people and I've learned to accept it and I'm okay with it. I think it was something that I wasn't necessarily mentally or emotionally prepared for when I had first left, but there are some relationships that are purely built on trauma bonding. And the difference between trauma bonding and I would say like venting for the sake of like closure or like being understood is like, I guess the easiest way I would identify it is like, is that the only like substance of your relationship?
Yeah.
Like that's the main thing. And so for me, when I left Salesforce, and even when I left that one workplace that's not even on my LinkedIn, like it became really clear that the only reason why I talked to this person, the only reason why I thought about this person or why we had camaraderie was because we were suffering together. We were constantly in the trenches together. And now, and this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, like the more healed version of you will become less and less compatible with certain relationships and people that were only compatible with your unhealed self. And so as I've been on this journey, as I'm feeling healthier, I'm getting better, like I'm sleeping better, like all these things, like those people aren't even on my radar anymore.
Yeah.
And I've learned to like, hey, like I know like the quality of my friendship, like I know I'm a dope person, like I know what I deserve in a friendship and in a relationship. And I'm not gonna waste the very short amount of time that I have on this side of eternity seeking out people who only came to me and saw value in me because of my trauma. Ooh, that's a word. So it's been good. So I would say quick checklist, like with those peers, those colleagues, do you only talk about like tough workplace situations, that one manager, like toxicity, all those things? Do you talk about other things that like you're passionate? Do they know you? Like just base level, like do they know you? Are they interested in you and your life outside of what you do in the 9 to 5? So yeah, those are some of my initial thoughts.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to, it made me think of something on the flip side of, there was a big group of friends that I had, and maybe 2019, before, we were here in this Pantone, I got rid of pretty much all, like a huge group of friends. And I'm talking like 100 solid, strong group of people. And we would go to festivals and we would travel and weddings and all of this stuff because of that healing incompatibility. When you're going through it and you are surrounded by people who are ignoring their issues, who are self-medicating, who are doing nothing but negative coping, there comes that point where you're like, I can't be around these people anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And so for me, it was like the other side of trauma bonds are like negative coping bonds. Who are the people I can go and negatively cope with? Who are the people I can go and do these things and numb myself out with? And a big part of that is like, of that big group of folks, I talked to 2 people. 2 out of over 100 of us, I talked to 2 of them because I still like them. But I also realized I was surrounded by people who were self-medicating, who were dealing in their trauma, who were causing trauma and drama amongst themselves with other people, refused to get help, enabled people's bad behaviors. And like, I didn't want to be around that kind of energy either.
Yeah.
You know, so that's like, for me, that's like the opposite of the trauma bond, is the like negative coping bond. And so I had to let go of the trauma bonds. I had to let go of the negative coping bonds. And then that left nothing but room for the people who I needed to have be able to enter my life to come in, because I wasn't filling it up with that time.
Oof. I love that. Like creating room for better and healthier to come in.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay. So good. All right, we're gonna wrap that up. Thank you so much, Alison, for taking the time and energy, for being vulnerable, for sharing of yourself. I appreciate it. I know folks on the call appreciate it. I'll say this: if you're interested in diving into more conversations like this, but doing it with community, my invitation to you is to join myself and Jarrell, licensed therapist I was talking about earlier, for our Healing Conversations cohort, which is going to be in October. But I'll leave you with this. You are worth so much more than your company, your manager, your team, any entity could ever communicate. And to Alison's earlier point, you have to decide to choose you. And there's no better day to do that than today. To have those boundaries, to get really clear on what you need to heal, to kind of cut off those unhealthy coping mechanisms and like recommit yourself to like the business of you. Like you are worthy of it. Like, you're deserving of it. And Allison and I just want people to operate from a place of freedom instead of fear. And it's possible. It's possible. And a lot of these entities will have you think that, no, this is normal. I just have to figure out how to work through this abusive situation, this toxic workplace. Like, you actually have a choice. And that is a beautiful thing. So with that, take care of yourself. I hope you're able to find some peace or joy this week. We will email out the recording of this and some additional resources, hopefully by the end of today, if not tomorrow morning. But yeah, that's all I have for you. Thank you so much, y'all. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, everybody. Vivian, thank you for having me. Let's be friends on the internet. Find me on Twitter.
Yeah.
You So Fancy. I'm usually out there yelling at white dudes and talking about fun stuff. Value your creatives. We value labor. And,
yes.
Also, I'm here for anybody who has any questions. If you're going through this, if you ever want to talk, if you're in LA, you want to talk about California short-term disability, navigating that whole system, leaves of absence, all of that kind of stuff. I am happy to make myself available to the community because you can't do it alone and you don't have to.
Ooh, I love it. All right. Take care of yourself, y'all. We'll talk soon.
All right. Peace. Bye. Bye.